along. So as you're turning at the Mill Bridge, you're leaving the townland of Dorsey, so that'll be on one side of your stone. And Dorsey, I suppose, one of the most important, or the first named marked townland in this area completely, because Dorsey means the gateways, and it was the gateways to Owenwaha. It was the route way for Conor MacNessa when the Celts were here. So the Celts came to Ireland in 400 BC. They were at their height in 100 AD. So the first time Dorsey, now the dates that you'll see written under these tonight are not the dates of their foundation, but they're the dates that they first appeared on maps, because there wasn't maps at the early time. Most of the mapping of Ireland was done in the 1600s. The map maker was Richard Bartlett. He travelled with Lord Mountjoy. Mountjoy built Myra Castle on the Gap of the North in 1601, and Richard Bartlett was travelling Ireland with him and mapping Ireland. Now, the reason they were mapping Ireland was that the British government were going to use it to create taxes on the people, and Bartlett was doing quite a good job until he took himself as far as Donegal, Tyrconnell, and the natives in Donegal decided that they didn't want their territory mapped, or they didn't want to be taxed. So when Bartlett arrived in Donegal, he met his Waterloo. He went to Donegal, but he never got home. But Dorsey as a name first appeared in 1224, which is very early. Dorsey's divided into split townlands: Dorsey, there's Finiskin, Dorsey, Herty, Roxburgh, Carrickawady, Dorsey, Mullaglass, and Dromald. So they're all subdivisions within. It's a very big townland. It is 1,300 acres, which is a fairly substantial townland. So in the 1911, the very first census of Ireland was in 1821, right across the island of Ireland. And every 10 years, just as it is now, the census was taken up every 10 years. Most of the census material for Ireland stored in the Four Courts in Dublin, and the Four Courts was born in the Civil War. So there is very little census material for Ireland before the 1901 census, which you can now get online. There's only fragments. We have an 1821 census. We're extremely lucky in Mullaban in that we have an 1821 census for 15 townlands in this area, because that document was lodged in Richard Jackson's papers, and it was discovered about 25 years ago. So that's extremely rare to have that. So your first census really for all across Ireland is 1901. The last one that's online, 1901 and 1911, is online. In a 10-year period, that would mean that there should be census material coming out this year. They only release the census material every 100 years. So the 1901 census wasn't released to 2001, the 1911 to 2011, which would mean that the 1921 one should be due for release this year, but there was no 1921 census, because that's when they decided that we were no longer part of Ireland. And there was no census taken up in Ireland, north or south, in 1921 because of partition. The next census that was taken up was taken when the Boundary Commission was abandoned in 1926. So there will be no census material released until 2026. So in the 1911 census, Dorsey had 136 houses. It had a population of 575, 525 of them Roman Catholic, 32 Church of Ireland, and 18 Presbyterian. So it's just useful maybe looking at that 1901 census in each townland and gauging. Now, the thing to be careful of with the census is that when the constable came to take the census, he wouldn't record anybody who wasn't in the house. Yeah. So if I'm in the house with Mickey and 2 children, and I have 3 more children, but they're not in the house, they don't get recorded. Mm-hmm. But if somebody is in my house visiting, when the enumerator, when the constable comes, they're registered in my house, but it's a separate entry in the census. But he records anybody who's in that house at the time that he calls, but doesn't record anyone who isn't. So that's just something to be aware of, that you're not always getting all of a family, and you sort of need to know your family if you're using it. So moving from Dorsey, you're going into Tullinaval, and Tullinaval, and that's your Irish spelling and your English spelling, and Tullinaval means the hillock of the hedges or the enclosures. Now Tullinaval standing stone, again a very important part of history, because the Dorsey, the gateways was the route to Ironmaha, and the stone that's in Pat Duffy's field, the standing stone that's at the top of the Dorsey in Pat Duffy's field, was the route marker. That was to let people know they were on the right route. Those standing stones were all across Ireland and used for many different things, but that one was undoubtedly used as a route marker to Armagh. The one that's over at Cullyhanna is put forward as the earliest dated Christian standing stone at 700 AD because of the inscription on it. But the stone was there long before Christianity. It was just Christianized by putting crosses on it and writing on it. So Tullinaval on the maps, the first time it's mentioned on a map is 1640. And in the 1911 census, Tullinaval had 60 houses, a population of 245, 229 of them Roman Catholic, and 16 of them Presbyterian. And moving on into Cullyhanna. Now, Cullyhanna is split into Cullyhanna Big and Cullyhanna Little. And that's why I talked to Teresa about what you decided to do with stones, because some of the boundaries then going from Cullyhanna Little and Cullyhanna Big into Freeduff are very much together. But it's notated in the historical stuff as Cullyhanna Big and Cullyhanna Little. So Cullyhanna Big, by its name anyway, is the biggest of the two of them, 656 acres. And it means woodland of the marshes. Now, you'll notice as we go through these tonight that you'll start to see prefixes that are similar. So if you see anywhere you see Liss or Rath as a prefix in your name, it means that there's a fort. Anywhere you see Mulla, it's the hillock of. If you see Bally, it's the townland of. So there are similar prefixes coming in front of the words. I did a piece of work in Market Hill, in the Protestant Primary School in Market Hill, and we had children down from the Irish School in Crossmaglen, and we were doing comparisons on townlands and talking about townlands, and they were absolutely amazed that there were townlands that had Rath and Liss in it down at Market Hill, the same as there was up at Crossmaglen. So this thing of, we started to throw all these words out about culture and who owns culture and who owns identity. The best way to look at culture and cross-community stuff is in the townlands, because the townland belonged to everyone. It was the piece of ground that you stood up on. So it didn't belong to any culture. It was there before any of these modern definitions of culture was there. So woodland of the marshes, and the first time Cullyhanna Big's appearing on a map is 1830 as the definition. And in the 1911 census, 42 houses, population of 166, 152 Roman Catholic, and 14 Presbyterian. And again, looking at the population figures, think about the fact that you're not recording all of the family, all of the people that are part of that family, that people are away in service or they're emigrated, or so there are different things. That means you have to be careful on those population figures before you use them as a record, as a total record. And Cullyhanna Little, again, your English and your Irish, which will appear on your stone, and 331 acres in Cullyhanna Little, also meaning woodland of the marshes. And it's stated as 1705 on the records for maps. 21 houses and a population of 67, and at that time, all of that 67 were Roman Catholic. So I'm taking these as you're moving along for what would be on front and back of your stones as you're going around. I'm not saying they're all totally in the right order. So the townland of Scariff, which is another big townland of 760 acres, and it means the shallow ford. And again, Scariff, Titscrum and Scariff Truman, not separate townlands, but there is a subdivision there that looks at it. I mean, sometimes people are, when we put in the stones here in Mullaban, we had altercations with several people that said that we did away with Berea. Berea is a part when you're going from Mullaban up to Forkhill, and Berea is on several headstones in Mullaban in the graveyard. But Berea is not a townland. It's a subdivision. It's a name that was just given to an area by the local people, but it's not a defined townland. But you know, as you go on, I think if your townlands are marked, there should be, I think, some way of looking at your subdivisions, things that were very local, and to try and keep a record of those, because they are equally as important, and probably at this stage we're even late with those, you know, because the people who did know them are no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they were very, very closely. I listened to, I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember Donncha Doolan on Radio Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
He had the loveliest, he did a program called Highways and Byways. He had the most beautiful radio voice, recording voice, but he travelled all over Ireland. He was in South Armagh on numerous occasions. But one Saturday night, his program was from Boston in America, and he was interviewing a man that was 84. He was a retired police sergeant in the Boston police force. And he hadn't talked really that much about what else he was. He talked about his working life in the police force. And then he started to ask him about his background. And he had been from County Mayo, and he'd left at 17. And he said to him, "And you never went back?" And he said, "Oh, I did, son, every night." And he started at the end of the Lonan, and he gave him the field names on either side of the Lonan, right up to the house, a house that he'd left, you know, 70 years, almost 70 years ago. But the field names were still there in his mind from he'd left. So Scariff, 52 houses, a population of 197, 157 of them Roman Catholic and 40 Presbyterian. It would be useful, it would be nice to just look at where your population figures are at the present day, and maybe that's, you know, maybe that's something that young ones in the school could look at. It makes absolute nonsense of the argument of why you took away your townlands and put in rural road naming, because I have absolutely no problem with a postcode, and a postcode defines an area down to a very small bit. But if the police constable on a bicycle from 1821 on could do a census of a townland by numbering the houses, then all you had to do in 1972, if there was a massive problem with people finding the place, was number the houses and postcode them, and leave the townland, number the houses in each townland. The only plausible reason of why this happened in 1972 was security. And it can be dressed up every way it wants, but the bottom line is that it was security. So Freeduff, which is taking you back up heading towards Cregan. Freeduff means the Black Heath or Moor, 497 acres, which is probably, off the top of my head, I'm not too sure, but maybe one of your smaller townlands. First dated 1766 for maps. And in the 1911 census only had 11 houses occupied, with a population of 54, 27 of them Roman Catholic, 5 Church of Ireland, and as you'd expect, 22 Presbyterian, because you had your meeting house in Freeduff. And you know, it's something, I suppose, that because Cregan is such a big part of the South Armagh story, that people tend to think that the Church of Ireland population was a bigger population than the Presbyterians. And in this area, it certainly wasn't. The Presbyterian community were a bigger community. Clog, and Clog again heading back towards Cregan, on a fairly big townland, 929 acres, and it means the stony place. And anywhere you have Carrick or Clough, you're going to have a stone definition. Dated in 1661, and in the 1911 census had 40 houses and a population of 186, 79 Roman Catholic, 26 Church of Ireland, and 81 Presbyterian. So you can see that anywhere you have the division of Church of Ireland and Presbyterian, which I suppose we all lump together as Protestant, that the Presbyterian community is a bigger community. And the Presbyterian community in that Craig and Cullyhanna area were a substantial community in the 1798 rebellion. The Donaldson family in particular in Clog were the leaders of the 1798 rebellion. Alexander Donaldson and his sons. Lord Blaney, he was commander of the Crown forces in Uri, said that he rode with horse and men and burned 4 houses belonging to the Donaldsons in Clog. The one piece of history that doesn't show, and that's quite common, is the women's history. Nobody ever wrote the women's history. But in that house of the Donaldsons was one girl, Peggy Bawn, and Peggy, as was quite commonly happened, went to live with a maiden aunt, and her aunt was in Killinchy in County Down, where the United Irish were extremely strong, where they had banded together much earlier, and the person, I would say with almost 100% certainty, that carried the United Irish oath to Cregan was Peggy Bawn Donaldson. Now, she was arrested so obviously under suspicion, but her story doesn't appear. But Lord Blaney does mention the Donaldson men. So Cregan-Duff, there's no parish that's just Cregan on its own. There's Cregan-Duff, which is the black rocky place, and Cregan-Ban-Glebe, which is the white rocky place, and Glebe is the church lands. So you're not going to be as far as Cregan-Ban. You'll be one of the back of your stones coming from Clog will be Cregan-Duff. And dated from 1609, in the 1911 census, 33 houses, population of 129, 122 Roman Catholic, and 7 Church of Ireland. So you're as you move up from around that Freeduff Clog area, you're starting to move away from the Presbyterian community, because that's mostly where they're based, and then heading back the other way to Balnaray. Anamar, which I suppose is a famous town, or should be a famous townland, because the court cairn at Anamar is one of the best court cairns in all of Ireland. Ballymcdermott court cairn, Clonchagora, all good court cairns, all that you can still see their definition and the fact that they're two passageways of court cairns. But Anamar is almost completely intact. All of its structure is still there. Its cairn across the top is still there. So Anamar really is a townland that I think South Armagh should be making more of. It's a fairly small townland, 447 acres. And townlands then were sold from one landlord to another. That's how they moved, how they changed hands. The townlands for this Cullyhanna area, for the Cregan area, a lot of them taken over by Thomas Ball. This area of South Armagh, the Fuse area of South Armagh, was ruled by the O'Neills, the chieftains. The same O'Neills as the O'Neills of Tyrone. They came to Cregan in 1480 and built their church at Cregan and built their castle at Glasdrummond. In the plantation, there was no plantation of Ulster in the land that was owned by the O'Neills, because the O'Neill pledged his allegiance to the crown. Turlough McHenry O'Neill pledged his allegiance to the crown, said that he wasn't involved in the 9 Years' War with Hugh O'Neill, and he retained his lands. So there was no plantation in that particular part of South Armagh. But in the Cromwellian confiscation, he was implicated in the 1641 rebellion, which was planned at the Crannog at La Ross. And in the Cromwellian confiscation, the O'Neill's land was seized and mostly administered to Thomas Ball. Thomas Ball was a Cromwellian soldier, and he got most of the O'Neill land. It's why you have Ball's Mill, lived in Ball's Mill, paid hard money rolls in Ball's Mill, and Camley Ball. So you have parts that are showing the fact that Thomas Ball was taking over the land. So Anamar had 24 houses, 97 of a population, and entirely Roman Catholic. The maps, these spellings in the English spellings are coming from the early definition of the name. So when the Irish names were translated, and this is if anyone that has read Brian Friel's play translations about the taking out of the Irish names to the English, everywhere so the names that are used in English are the early spellings that were shown on maps, and that's how we've done these ones. But everywhere Kiltyban and Lisleitrim go together as the same townland. There's 447 acres in it. Kiltyban, now Kilcaban, the White Woods, and Lisleitrim, the Fort of the Grey Ridge. Now, equally, Lisleitrim, you know, the three-ring fort, the triumphant fort at Lisleitrim is outstanding. And the only other one of the same quality as Lisleitrim is in County Kerry. You know, so you know, we're not doing enough to promote the archaeology and the heritage that we have in South Armagh. So dated from 1640, small number of houses, 26 houses, and a population of 98, 87 Roman Catholic and 11 Presbyterian in that townland. Drumlochar means ridge of the rushes. So I imagine it's boggy. Now, these names are not plucked out of the air. You know, the townland names define either the environmental features or the archaeology features or a myth, some of the myths. If you're coming up from, if you turn a Welsh's crossroads on the road that's taking you up through Carramonnan, Cara is Cathric, is quarter. Mannan was the god of the sea, the mythological god of the sea. When you're at the top of Carramonnan, you can see the Irish Sea. So these names were important for the areas that they were in. So dated 1661, 30 houses in 1911, a population of 137, 130 Roman Catholic and 7 Presbyterian. And turning you back then to Ballinaray. Bally is the townland. Anywhere that you see Bally as your prefix to your name, it's the townland of somebody. Yeah, so Ballinaray means the townland of the river, dated from 1657, 14 houses, a population of 68, 61 Roman Catholic and 7 Presbyterian. So say, for instance, that some of the children took the smaller of the townlands. It could be that difficult to do. Somebody's coming through. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, somebody else was coming.
Yes.
So Mulladuff and Mullaghdu. Mulla is a hilltop. Now, when the names were being brought out from the Irish language to the English language, they tried to bring them out in such a way as they would sound or at least look in some way similar. But it didn't always work, because in the case of anywhere there's Mulla, it means hilltop. But in our case here in Mullaban, Mullaghbawn means the White Hill. And when it was brought out into the English language, it was brought out and at the start spelled B-A-N-E, which was fine, but then turned to be spelled B-A-W-N. which doesn't work because a bawn was a surrounding wall for anywhere there was a fortified house or castle. Like Hamilton's Bawn. The Hamiltons had their fortified castle in Hamilton's Bawn. So Mullabawn being spelled B-A-W-N makes a nonsense of what was the proper definition of an Mullaght Bawn, which was the White Hill. So Mulladuff is the Black Hilltop. It's 1766, a population of 49 in 10 houses, 21 Roman Catholic and 28 Presbyterian. So you're back into your Presbyterian community coming into the fore again, and even more so here when you come to Courthamlet. Now, when you see Cor here, it's cut through. It's the same as Corrimonnan. It's quarterland. So it means the quarterland of the burial ground, dated from 1766. Paddy, there's 3 people looking in, coming up on my screen. It means the quarterland of the burial ground. It's dated from 1766, and in the 1911 census, 32 houses and a population of 130. 12 Roman Catholic, 9 Church of Ireland, and 109 Presbyterian. So that was the biggest Presbyterian community in any of the townlands that are part of that Cullyhanna area. Athnamacken, and a curious definition of Athnamacken. It means the glen or the cliff of the parsnips. And that has come up again. There are most of the townlands in some form are especially ones that have Dira, are repeated several times. There are, I think, off the top of my head, I think there's 24 townlands in Ireland that are Derrymore and Dirramore, the big wood, same as Derrymore just outside Camla. And there are even more, 32, I think, I'd need to look it back up again, that are Derrybeg. So Derrybeg is not the houses, it's not just that housing estate. That's not Derrybeg. Derrybeg is a townland. And they named those houses after it. And just for the poor law, for the workhouse in Uri was where Daisy Hill Hospital is now. That was the site of the workhouse. Now, some areas retained their workhouses and refurbished them. But the one in Daisy Hill went completely. And that greenfield site, just as you're turning in to Daisy Hill, that was the pauper's graveyard. So if you died in the workhouse and you had nobody to bring you home or no money to bury you, they brought you directly from the workhouse. And there are many, many people buried in that green field. And it's only now, I suppose, because the trauma of the workhouse was, and the stigma of the workhouse was that bad for families, that there 3 generations on, people didn't know that they had somebody belonging to them in the workhouse. And then there's a lot of people now starting to look for where would they get the registration of deaths even, because they've discovered maybe that a brother of their grandfathers or their grandmother's people were in the workhouse in Uri. So Athnamacken dated from 1830, 20 houses, a population of 86, 3 Roman Catholic and 83 Presbyterian. And Sheatram are fairly big townland, and Sheatram meaning the fairy ridge. Anywhere the she were the fairy women, Banshee.
Here, Sean.
The Banshee
You're missing it.
when somebody was going to die, they would have said that the Banshee was following some houses. My mother had a horror. She was extremely superstitious. And my Granda McKeever, unbelievable. But she would have had a horror of a robin. If there was a robin around the house, she would become completely obsessed that somebody was going to die. But the she women were the fairy women. Dated from 1640, and in the 1911 census had 43 houses, population of 175, 163 Roman Catholic, 4 Church of Ireland, 7 Presbyterian, and for the first time a Methodist, 1 Methodist. Now, there was a Methodist church in Cross, where McNamee's Bakery is, or was, at the top of the square, was where the Methodist church was in Cross. But I don't suppose it was kept up by one Methodist down in Sheathram. Tullyvallen. And Tullyvallen is one of the biggest townlands in Ireland. There's 4,500 acres in the townland of Tullyvallen. It means O'Mallon's hillock, Tulla again, meaning the hillock. But there are many divisions then within Tullyvallen: Tippin, Hamilton, McCullough. These are landlords' names. So landlords hadn't the full townland, they had part of a townland. And after we got married first, Mickey said to me one night, I don't know where we'd been, but he said to me one night, do you see if you and your father's going anywhere again? He said, I not bother going. He said, because all you do is go see dead people in graveyards. And you obviously have no heat on anyone that's living. But there was a girl who lived at Silverbridge, Kathleen McConaughey, and Kathleen married a man from Rathlin Island and went to live on Rathlin Island. And she'd been on the phone to Mommy, and she was complaining that nobody ever went down to Rathlin Island to see her. And we decided we'd all go to Rathlin. I had sisters in Belfast, and we'd all meet up in Ballycastle, and we'd go to Rathlin Island for the day. And the night before, Mickey said to me, was your dad ever on Rathlin Island? And I said, no, he never, none of us were ever on Rathlin Island. And he said, because he'd been at school with Kathleen, he says, oh, well, I'll go then. He said, because if he wasn't on Rathlin Island, he doesn't know anyone that's dead on it. So we were going over on the ferry to Rathlin Island, and Daddy leaned over and he said to me, because we were reared in Tullydonald, and there were two divisions in Tullydonald, Tullydonald O'Callaghan and Tullydonald Gage. And we were going over on the ferry, and he said to me, you know the way the Gages owned half of Tullydonald? And I said, yeah. He says, well, you know they owned Rathlin Island. He said, and they're all buried on Rathlin Island. And Mickey said, well, freak them anyway. But they are. The Church of Ireland on Rathlin Island is all the Gages. They were went to the east. They were all military men. So Tullyvallen, as I say, a very big townland, and where my grandmother came from. In the 1911 census, now I've only done the land part of Tullyvallen just for those numbers. I didn't go through the town of Newton Hamilton. Newton Hamilton, as it says on the tin, it was the new town of the Hamiltons, the same Hamiltons as Hamilton's Bawn that had set up the town. So I didn't bring those numbers into it. But it had a population of 757, 116 Roman Catholic, 17 Church of Ireland, and 409 Presbyterian. So big Presbyterian community. Your Presbyterian community is your biggest numbers all along. So this is Tier, which will be on the back of one of your stones as well. And Tier, just as it says, it means land or territory. And Tier itself, 248 acres in Griffith's valuation, and 127 acres on Tier, Ireland. And a small number of houses, 19, and a population of 82, all of them Catholic. So that really has taken you around. Hang on, somebody's waiting to get in.
Yeah, Una, Una, when you're just muted, will you ask everybody just to mute, because there isn't a bit of interference, and maybe some people are probably not aware that they're on, you know, they're on off mute, that their microphones are on.
Okay, could everybody mute, because we're gonna, once I get through the next couple of slides, we're gonna open it up and have a discussion on it.
Yeah,
but one of the things I looked at as well, just for 3 townlands, was the classification of houses, because that's one of the things you can find out with the Griffiths valuation. And with now 2 things. Griffiths valuation was the land valuation. It looked at the acreage of land. It was done entirely to tax people. That's what it was done for. But the number that was put, and this again is something to be careful, the number that was put on the piece of land when Griffith was doing the valuation is the same number. Could everyone just mute, because there's some noise coming through?
Una, see if you are sorry. That's I know. That's what I was supposed to be doing. But you see if you click on participants, there should be an option for you to mute all. Because probably the people who we need to mute maybe just aren't paying attention or whatever. Just at the minute.
Great, you can.
If you click on participants, can you see an option to mute all?
No.
No. Don't worry about it then. But I think maybe that's better than it was anyway.
Yeah. The number that was put on the housing, on the piece of land, in Griffith's valuation, Griffith started to do the valuation in 1846. From 1846 to 1865 was Griffith's valuation time. And the number he put against the land, the plot of land that was belonging to somebody or leased by somebody at that time, that number remained constant. So if you go to the land valuation now in Belfast, the number that's on that plot of land is the same number that was put on it at the time it was done. Right, that's everyone muted now. With the census material, the number on the 1901 census for a house is not the same number that's on the 1911 census, because it depended where the policeman started to do his recording. You know what I mean? So the land valuation number has remained constant, but if you're looking at the 1901 census and then you're looking at the 1911 census, you need to be aware that the number on the house may not be the same number. So you know, for especially for an area where there are a lot of names the same, that's where you're going to hit it. But as part of the census material, when you scroll down, you can go into participants and then scroll down, and it gives you the type of housing. It allows you to be able to collate the type of housing was in the area. So the poorest housing was fourth class housing. That would be attached house that was probably one room and one kitchen, and maybe only one bay of a room. So it went from fourth class to first class. First class being your highest classification. So you were classified as by the type of wall, whether it was a brick wall, a built wall, or whether it was a mud wall. You were classified by your roof. If your roof was slated or tiled, if it was thatched, by the number of windows in the house. So all of those they were all added up, and that gave you your house classification. So the houses in the Cullyhanna area were fairly good in comparison to the houses in even some of the townlands around Mullaban area, especially maybe around that Cashel, those Cargan areas. Because in Cullyhanna Big, you had 42 houses. You had 3 first-class houses, which was good. 30 in a second-class division and only 9 in third class, and no fourth-class housing. So that's fairly good housing for 1911. Mulladuff, I only took 3 of them just to look at them. Mulladuff, 12 houses, 1 of them a first-class house, and 11 of them, the other 11 were second-class houses. And in Drumloher, with 17 houses, 1 was a first-class house, 11 a second-class, and only 5 third classes. So it's even useful for that type of thing. But the one thing that sometimes takes you by surprise, because you sort of think, when the 1911 census came out first, the 1901 census came out first, I went to look for Kernally. And I sort of knew what I was going to find. I knew that my great-grandfather had died in January of 1901. And the census was taken up on the 1st of April. So I knew he wasn't going to be in the house. I knew what age my grandfather was if he was in the house. But when I went to look at the census, my great-grandmother Rose could read and write, which wasn't that maybe common for women, especially at that time in 1901. And she was Rose Carraher from Dramill Bridge, from where Pat Duffy lives now. But she could read and write, so she had filled in her own census If you couldn't read and write, when the policeman came, he filled in your census, and then he got you to put an X at the bottom, and he signed it to say that he'd witnessed it. But if you could read and write, you were allowed to fill in your own census. And she had written it. Now, when I looked at her handwriting, and that took me completely by surprise, when I looked at her handwriting, it was exactly as if my father had written it. She died in 1915. My father was born in 1916. He'd never met her. But there is a common thread in people's handwriting. And that took me completely by surprise. So if you want to go into the census, this is all you have to do, is to put in this
a historian
for your census National Archive. You click on the year you want to look at, so it's going to be 1901.
Well, I don't have a chair. Yeah.
And you look for your deed.
Lean back on the.
Sheila.
So you don't get your back doesn't get sore.
Sheila, there's the noise just coming through there. You could mute.
Oh.
Yeah, I've muted everyone.
There's still a few people that aren't. I don't know. Well, they're obviously impervious to your powers. You know, there's about 10 or 12 of us. Or
well, look, we'll soon be finished opening it up anyway. So if you go into the census material, click 1901, and just click browse in your thing across the top. And you'll go into the DEDs, the District Electoral Division. So if you look for the name that's nearest your area, it'll bring you up maybe 6 or 7 townlands, and you can go into it. And you get your whole family information. Now, most of you that are listening tonight are grandparents. So your grandchildren can go in to the 1901 census and print off a form that their probably great-grandparents wrote. It's an amazing resource for people to have, and to have it online, and to not have to leave your own area to do any type of research. And if you want to look at the land valuations, then you put in Ask About Ireland, and it'll give you Griffith's valuation, and then you're putting in your information, your barony, which is Fuse Upper, your parish, which is Cregan. Now those last townlands of Mulladuff, Tullyballin, Ballinarray, they're in the civil parish of Newton-Hamilton. So most of your townlands are Cregan, but there are, I think, 6 of them in the civil parish of Newton-Hamilton. Now, right, Paddy, that's the end of the presentation. So we'll open it up for anyone that wants to come in and talk or make comment or find out anything more.
Yeah, thanks, Una, and thanks for the presentation there. That was brilliant. Well, first of all, can I apologise to the people? I had a bit of a technological issue there myself, so I don't have a record of all the questions, but just a couple. One that's probably pretty quick, Una, just about the presentation. That you be able to email that round some of the folks that attended. Is that okay?
I'll email it to Teresa and she can share it around.
Super. And then one of the questions that I do remember, and I say if anybody wants to fire them up in the chats, or we'll open it up as well. But one was about a place called Priesttown, that I think is just maybe the other side of the border. I'm looking here, Una, on the map on the Steve Gullion site, and it just seems to be the side of the border there at Tullyard and Corliss, cross direction. Yeah. So somebody was asking about that, if you knew.
I don't know an awful lot about it. I mean, I know where it is. I've seen it on the maps, but I can't give you a lot of information on it, but I can find out more about it. Kieran maybe Kieran knows something about it, no?
Muted. Mute, Kieran. Just unmute, Kieran.
All right, I'm unmuted myself now.
That's it. We're here now, Kieran.
Yeah. What was it called?
Priesttown. It's just the Monaghan side of the. It's on Google Maps. and it's beside Dromacon, but it seems to be very close to the border, just around Corliss, Corliss direction.
But it's in the south. It's in the south. I mean, I've seen it, but I don't know a lot about it. But I mean, it's something I can find out for anyone. It's not.
It's just on the Corliss Tullyard border.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's on Google Maps, so I suppose most of us look at
I
that.
thought you would know, Kieran.
No, I don't know now about it now, though it's over in my country, all right.
But it's not a town land now.
Would it be a subdivision like this?
Yeah, it's not a townland, so it's probably a subdivision in that maybe there was a priest there at some time, and that it just became, you know, that maybe there was a priest living in it at some time, and that became. There's a small piece just outside Mullavan village here, and it was known as Mullinstown, and there were only 4 houses in it, but they were all Mullins. There's the same in Kernally. Down from where Daddy was born, it's Campbellstown, and all the houses in that wee small part were all Campbells, and it just became known as Campbellstown. So I'm presuming that it's something to do with that.
Sorry, you know, don't interrupt you, but has anybody ever tried to compile the subdivisions?
No, and that's what I was saying, Kieran. Really, you know, the townlands, I suppose, are the biggest divisions, but it would be important at a local level if somebody tried to do the subdivisions. Maybe not to mark them, because you don't want to. I suppose there's a balance between putting up stones and destroying the look of the place. You know, you don't want to destroy the countryside with stones either.
Yeah, I'm not really concerned with the fact that
No, it's about having the information.
I mean, I know a couple in Tullyvallen. I mean, there's Ballinahone and there's Lurganina, for example, which are nowhere on maps, but older people would have knew the areas. Ballinahone would be around where those Murphy families live, around the quarry there. But those surnames have died out now, or people have knowledge of them.
Well, that's the biggest problem. Is that the number of people who knew those? There's very few of them left here.
It would be important to write them down, to have them for future reference.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing about the subdivisions and even the field names. That anyone that has a farm, we were doing a townland project in the school, and one wee fella in Drum Valley, McKeever, came in with his. We'd asked them to get stories of their grandparents, and he came in, and there was 8 fields on the farm, and he gave us the 8 field names that had always been used in their house, and they kept using them. So he knew them, and he was only 10, but he knew the names of the fields that had always been used. So
Hello.
I think
Hello.
it is.
My husband says that there was a scheme in the 60s, and to get onto the scheme, you had to name each field, give it a name. So most farms would have names on their fields.
Yeah, but whether they were the old names or whether people just put a name on them then for what was going, he had the names that were on the buying out documents.
Oh, very good.
You know, the land was bought out. The land was bought out with the Land Acts, the Wyndham Land Acts, and he had the names that were taken off those documents. But it'd be a nice project. County Louth published a very detailed book, and Owen McCann from the townland of Dungooly, which is the next townland, it's the first townland in the south when you're going out from South Armagh. And he had done the field names of Dungooly. So it would be lovely if somebody could take it on.
Una, there's a few questions coming here through. Thanks, everybody. And just as I say, we'll open it up obviously as well too. If you have something to say, but if you want to just use the chat, I can read them out. But the first one here is that I can see is Kilroken a subdivision? It's near Kiltyban. You'd mentioned there about Kiltyban and Lisleitrim effectively being.
Kilroken was a small area that was, and that's where the division came for the Catholic dividing of Upper Cregan and Lower Cregan, came around that Kilroken area. Two women came from, can't remember what part of America. Two women came about 4 or 5 years ago, and they were looking Kilroken, and they had ancestors that had left that area, but it was a subdivision. It wasn't a townland.
Right. That hopefully answers that then. And then the next one is this was something you touched on. Somebody else was Cullyhanna Little, also known as Old Town, mentioned. So yeah, I suppose there that Cullyhanna Little, Old Town, then two areas would be sort of interchangeable. Maybe is there some record of that of that being Old Town, Una?
Well, I don't know, but I know that my granddad, Paddy McKeever, never would have referred to Cullyhanna Little. He would have referred to it as Old Town at local level. Like so I don't know. They're the things I think, Paddy, that you know best in your own area that you lived in. You know what I mean? So on going on the maps, it's referenced as Cullyhanna Little, but I know my granddad always talked about Old Town.
Yeah, Kieran, that'd be probably accurate enough then, that it would mostly be Old Town to be more commonly used phrase.
Yeah, people would still generally refer to it as Old Town or Old Town, but I mean, what the origins of its name is, I don't know. There's no sign of it. There's no sign of Old Town ever on a map.
No. No, I checked the maps, and on the maps, it's Cullyhanna Big and Cullyhanna Little. But I know from listening to him that's what he referred to it as. And I assume that it must have been what was being used when he was about, when he was around Cullyhanna.
Yeah.
Still used. Still used. Yeah. I thought Paddy was coming back with another question.
Oh, I have a good few more. But sorry, I thought somebody else was coming in, but maybe there was just somebody maybe just needs to be muted. He's kind of told, folks.
Yeah,
this one, I know this one's maybe a wee bit controversial. Is Dorset a town as well as a townland? So do you have do you have a definition of town there, Una? Somebody's asked, is Dorset a town and a townland?
I never heard Dorset referred to as a town. No. My mother would have caused controversy in our house when the Bridge would be playing Cullyhanna, because Cullyhanna was all one football club at that time, and it was all referred to as Dorset. And when our boys, my brothers, were playing football and the Bridge was playing Dorset, she used to say, maybe I'll go down today and cheer for Dorset.
Yeah, I think that I just on that one, Kieran, from your book, which of course we've all read many times. It would have been Peter because Peter McKeever was one of the significant people associated with the club when the two joined. It did become sort of known as Dorset throughout the county. Is that something that's pertained, right up until probably the present day, or certainly relatively recently?
Yeah, I suppose it was, because Peter became synonymous, I suppose, with the club, and he was a Dorset man himself. So
That's not the one of us, did you?
Well, I know, Kieran, when we were growing up, I mean, and we followed football because there's nothing else to follow. There was nothing else on, and if you were going to the football, you were allowed out because your brothers would be going with you, so that was the only place you were getting out to. But there never was a football, there never was a club called Cullyhanna when we were growing up. It was always Dorset.
Yeah.
Always referred to as Dorset.
No, really.
So that in your time, all right, but they had been there in the 20s and 30s. There was some Palace Cullyhanna as well at that time. Dorset team.
Yeah. Folks, can we just try the mute?
But Dorset, Paddy, Dorset certainly was an important townland, because of the whole Dorset itself, because of and they've done a dig recently where they've found out in Aaron Waha they built the round house at Navan Fort. They built the roundhouse, a massive big roundhouse, and then they burned it. And then those burned timbers were buried. And that's that mound that you see down at Navan Fort. They uncovered some of the burned timbers. But the archaeologists did a dig last year with the school children on the crossing of the road where they thought there had been no activity, up behind Ollie Herty's house. They dug a piece on his land, and they found the tracing of burned timbers there as well. So Dorsey was an important townland linked to the whole story of Navan Fort. Definitely was.
Okay, Una.
Yes.
Sorry to disrupt again. Will you go back up and make Paddy host again, and then he can manage the noise there that's coming through. There's some people probably doesn't realise that they have that. Yeah, so Paddy just.
I'll hopefully be able to mute.
Right.
Right. Hopefully this works. Right. A couple
Here.
back in.
Here, mute my host. He's on his phone now.
No, what is it?
Right. I've asked you to unmute there, Una. So if you unmute, then I
If
think
any
we'll
of them
have...
want to ask a question, they'd need to unmute though.
Yes. Oh, anybody can unmute. It's just there's definitely people that there's definitely people that don't realise they're unmuted. That are there's definitely people that are unmuted. They don't realise they're unmuted. The next one, just on the door shoes, one here to state them, but just to finish off the door shoes, somebody asking about somebody asking about Blake's Inn. Do you have any information on Blake's Inn in Dorsey?
Yeah, well, Blake's Inn was where Sammy Burns lived. That was the house that George Blake's Inn. George Blake was a Cromwellian soldier as well, but Blake's Inn, he would have had a foot in both camps, I suppose, for a good part of his time. But Sammy would have been very proud of the fact that he lived at Blake's Inn in Dorsey. You see, that would have been the route way. The road that left Tara, there were 5 roads left Tara, and one of them came north and was known as the Slieve Malucra. And just as it was leaving County Louth, it divided. And it came into South Armagh in 2 directions. So one of it came in through the Gap of the North, and right down through the Gap of the North and on to Dunseverick in County Antrim, where the international airport is. And that would still have been known as the Slieve Malucra. And the other one that came in, the other division of it came in as the Ballymorna Fada, the Great Road of the Fuse. And that came down through Dorsey, back down the top of Carrickawadi, over what's 9 Mile Hill now, out the back of Newton Hamilton, and down to Armagh. And it is said, if you're going from Donnelly Shop to Ford's Cross, and you're driving that way from the bridge heading towards Ford's, there's a laneway, what looks like a laneway up to a field on your left-hand side, just across from the 2 houses. And that's part of the road structure of the Ballymorna Fada, my dad would have said. But that's the road that the funeral of Brian Boru came to be buried in Armagh City. He's buried where the Protestant Cathedral sits in Armagh City.
Right, that's great. My sort of screens for again, I think we've got the muting issue dealt with, but my screens froze again. But I do remember a couple of them. One was an area, I think it's in around Ford's Road, has been asked about, Una, called Boxy's Gullet. Do you have any knowledge of it?
No, and where is it?
I think it's I think it's sort of in around sort of Ford's Road, the Sleatham area, Sleatham Road, Bog Road.
No,
See,
but I'll try and find out.
It says, did you ever hear that Bard Padraig McGill? Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah, from Lisleitrim.
Right. Sorry. What one's that, Teresa?
Is that the one you were on about from Lisleitrim? The townland is Padraig McGill. No, is that
right? That's another one. But so that's right. That's a poet then, Teresa. Is it somebody's asking about?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's, so what is it, Padraig McGilla Finton came from the townland of Leitrim. I think it's just somebody saying that. I think there's just somebody.
All right. Yeah, there's a fair number of Consort and Seamus Mallon, when Seamus Mallon was in Cross School, they published a lot of the old poems that were written, and there's a fair number of them from around that Cullyhanna area. Now I have a copy of those, so I can photocopy those and send them to Theresa as well.
Yeah.
People like those.
And another one was just that I picked up as well, Luna. Can you have you any explanation for the good standard of housing that seemingly there was in the Cullyhanna area?
Well, I don't know, because it surprised me, Paddy. You know, I thought when I was doing, I thought it'd be nice to compare the townlands and to look at the acreages of the townlands. And then when I had that bit done, I thought, I wonder what the housing was like. And it surprised me that there was absolutely no fourth classification of house in round that Cullyhanna area, because certainly I know up here there definitely was. But then the other thing I'll say is that the land probably around that Cullyhanna area was better land than we would have had up here. You know, it would have been more fertile land. It would have been a better quality of land than here. Although I suppose it's boggy, but I mean, up here's mountain. My dad used to say about Kernally, because it was all rocks, that you break your back before you break your fast, that it would grow nothing. So maybe that has something to do with it. But it would be an interesting thing to carry on. I just did 3 townlands to look at. But it'd be interesting to do all of them and see what you throw up.
Yeah, maybe that's something that we can, just because we are hoping to do quite a bit with the townlands just over the next year. Do a bit of historical.
Well, it's as simple as going in. You just go into your census, and when you go down, if you click on occupants and go down, you'll see the building returns. You'll see first of all the number of houses and the population figures, and then you'll see the building returns. And you can go into each townland and look at the housing that's in it. Yeah.
So I have a good few questions here as well coming through. Una. So one is asking for to give us a bit of information on if you have it, on the Leitrim Fort, if that's possible.
Well, other than, I mean, the only way to see the Leitrim Fort now is aerial pictures, because the land has changed in that you can't see. But if you have an aerial photograph, and I have an aerial photograph, so I'll send it on to Theresa as well, you can see very clearly from the aerial pictures. It's a 3-ringed fort. Now, the rule of thumb was that if you had a fort area convenient to a lake that has a crannog. So Leitrim Lake has a crannog. A crannog is an artificially created island. That if you had a fort area convenient to the lake with the crannog, that it meant somebody of a higher social standing lived there. And I've never found a reference to who that was in regards to Leitrim. But you have the same over at Corliss, in that you have Corliss Fort now. It wouldn't be the 3-ring fort that Leitrim is, but Corliss Fort is there just directly over La Ross with a crannog, and the O'Neills, the chieftains at Cregan, were involved in La Ross. So that was the sort of royalty or higher standing that there was at La Ross, but I've never found any reference to who the royalty was at Leitrim, but that would be the general way of looking at it.
Right.
But I know that I was at an event one night with I can't think of the name of the guy that was doing it, and he said that the 2 best ring forts, three triumphant 3-ring forts, the 2 best in Ireland were Kerry and Leitrim.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, we'll maybe try and find out who the royalty was anyway.
Well, you see, that's the other thing, Paddy. most of that early material, you're depending on the oral tradition. Do you know what I mean? The stories weren't written stories. Some of them became written stories, like the whole story now of Navan Fort is, and you know, Conor McNessa and Satanta and Cullen, they're all written stories now, but they were all oral stories, and we were lucky that there was enough of the oral tradition that saved them to allow them to become written stories. You know, so you're dependent on how good the oral tradition is, or whether at any time somebody put a record out of it, and they may not have done, you know.
No, that's that makes sense. But just a good example of why how important it is to write things down when they're in your head as such. Somebody else has asked about Anamar, and is there any reference to it as Athnamarav? ATH na Marav, MARBH, as in fort of the dead, referring to the tomb. So I know you mentioned that there's maybe various spells or whatever, though I suppose the Irish. But is that something you'd seen, a reference you'd seen, Athnamarav?
No, well, this booklet was published. This was done by Kieran Murphy, when Kieran was in he was the Irish language officer in Uri Mourne Council. It's published probably more than 20 years ago now, and he'd used there was a program running through Queen's University. It was on place names, and they were gathering. They had workers doing the whole thing of the place names, so all of the references that were used for the doing of the maps and the stuff have been taken from their work, from the Place Name Society through Queen's University now. And so the definition of Anamar is what's coming, I'm using from them. I've heard the story of you know, of it being classified like that because of the dead, but I've never seen it written down, Paddy.
Right. Okay. No, thanks, Una. The next one is just a query. Is it possible to find out the old names of fields in a farm rather than just the names that the family may have called them? So is there, I suppose, does at any level of history, does it divide into fields, or is the sort of townland subdivision as low as it goes as such?
In a very odd time on some of the older maps, you'll see some wording that probably was field names, but not, you know, it would be too big of a classification to go into field names. You know, when you consider that, you know, the first mapping really was coming from, in any sort of a big way, was coming from the 1600s on, and they didn't take it down as far as field names. It was only if somebody did something local. Now there's a fella, he's Kieran McMurrough. He's from around that Banbridge area. He was in South Armagh. Kieran would have met him. He did a presentation one night for the Cregan Historical, and he's gone round the area, right round from Banbridge up, and he's trying to collate subdivisions and field names. He's willing to interview anyone that has any information so that he can record it and map it. So it might be worth making contact with him. I don't know if he's met anyone round. I know he's definitely met some couple around Kernally, Carrickney-Gavin area. So if there's anybody has any information, it would be worth getting in contact with him and see, has he met anyone?
Right.
Your biggest problem now is that the people who knew this, you know, were probably late on it. You know, we're probably late in how much information that there's left. Like if I think now what I know about my townlands, you know, it's not a quarter of what my dad knew. And he probably didn't know a quarter of what my granddad knew. You know, because the further back you go, the less people were moving. You know, they grew up and they lived in a very small area, and they knew it in complete detail, in every small detail. And we don't do that. We don't know that. But I think it's important that children know their own townland and that they know when they move from one townland into another one.
Yeah, and I suppose hopefully then once we get these stones up, Una, that'll be a massive part of that. So just the other couple more questions, then we'll maybe open it up just on the chat. Sorry, that bard was Podrick McGilla Indan or Findan from the townland of Lisleitrim. But so maybe one for us to look into as we're looking at the looking more into the townlands. And then some as well been said that apparently Cardinal O'Fee referred to Athnamarav. So obviously that makes
Gerard Trimble has done quite a bit of work on the Gaelic poets as well. So he might have more information on some of those poets. He's done several pieces of work on the poets.
Yeah, okay. Right, yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, that's the Teresa there is just asking people that if you'd like a copy of the presentation, just to get your email into the chat box, or if you can't get working in the chat box, if you contact however really you got the link in the first place, we'll be able to get the presentation to you. You just leave your email. I know there's a lot of people who would have been messaging my or not my Facebook, messaging the Sympathics GEA Facebook. So look, people's showing a lot of interest. Here, Podrick McAlinden is maybe that name. I'm maybe butchering the native tongue a little. I just
Our McAlinden's buried in Craggin. Podrick McAlinden.
Okay, so that's maybe
Patrick.
Yeah.
Paddy, I think maybe Louis wants to maybe ask a question there.
Yeah, sorry, I see somebody's hand up. Yeah, go on ahead.
I just want to come back for a moment. I was looking at the 1911 census, the question about Dorsey. If I could, can I share my screen?
Yep.
Hang on just a minute. Hang on. Just have to get them together here. Okay. Now, can you see my screen?
No.
Well, let me read this. This is the 1911 census. And at the top it says South Armagh, okay. The Poor Lane Union was Castle Blaney.
Yeah.
Then it says that the district electoral division is Dorsey. And then it gives the townland as Tullyvale and Tipping East.
Yeah, the DED.
That's my confusion about Dorsey.
No, the DED, Dorsey is a townland in itself, but Dorsey is also a DED. So each DED could have 6 or 7 townlands. It's just a district electoral division. So in part of your townlands, you'll find them in Dorsey. If you look in the 1911 census, you'll also see that one of the DEDs is Lisleitrim, and Lisleitrim will give you, off the top of my head, it'll give you Ballinarray, Mulladuff. You know what I mean? So when you go in, if you're not exactly sure where you're going to find your townland, look for a name of a DED that's near to where you're looking for.
That was my confusion. Is
No.
this is Dorsey?
Yeah.
Dorsey,
So Dorsey is a DED, and Dorsey, I think, takes in 2 of the townlands that are here in my area. I think it takes in Cashel and Anduff and Dorsey, because Dorsey's literally just down the road from Anduff.
Okay.
But it's a brilliant resource. It's an absolutely terrific resource, online and free.
Yeah, and so maybe we'll, Una, when we're sending out the presentation, we'll maybe send a couple of them links. I know somebody's been asking about the maps as well. and I fired in that link for the Steve Gullion website and the Townlands map. Somebody's also saying here it's just that tipping east, Louis, that's where the cottages are, Tullyvallen. So I suppose that's that's
yeah,
the
well, Harry Mount Cairn would be in Tullyvallen Tippin.
Yeah.
And it's a bronze. It again. I mean, you're on your route way again to Navan Fort, because Harry Mount is a Bronze Age Bronze Age cairn. So that's how you moved. You moved from New Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age, and Iron Age was the coming in of the Celts. So Harry Mount is a Bronze Age cairn, burial cairn.
right.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
And then the one other question I have here, is there any reference to the Cargy in Scariff? I suppose that's maybe getting at where the Cargy Road came from in the Scariff area.
No, I mean, I don't know how they threw up some of the names. Now, there may well be a reference locally to Cargy that I don't know about. But I mean, some of the roads, you're looking at how did they come up with the name of them. Because if you leave Forkhill Village, from Forkhill Village right down that road till you hit the Newry Road, is all the Longfield Road. But that goes through 5 townlands. And the Longfield Road isn't even at the beginning of the road, nor the end of the road. It's in the middle of the road. So when somebody my age, I mean, the first thing when you're pulling crack out of a child, the first thing you'll say is, what's your name? And then you'll say, and where are you from? And they're using a name of a townland on a road that's not even in a context of where it is. So some of the stuff they did, the road that I grew up on in Tullydonnell is now called the Ballinaclosia Road. Ballinaclosia is a townland where I went to school. It's not in Tullydonnell. So some of it was complete nonsense, and it shouldn't. I mean, it's very well looking back in hindsight, but I mean, it shouldn't have been allowed to happen in the first place. That's the first thing about it. And some of the names, I suppose, there's a story to some of the names, the like of Ford's Cross. Ford's Cross is called Ford's Cross because of the house that's in the field as you're going up to Crossmaglen, and that was the house of Francis Ford. And Francis Ford, when the government were putting money in on a road scheme at the time of the famine, Francis Ford put his own money in. He employed tenants to straighten the road from Crossmaglen to Silver Bridge, and where the two roads met became known as Ford's Cross. So that has sound historical value in calling it Ford's Cross, and even more so in the fact that he was church warden of the Church of Ireland. At the time that the Church of Ireland was the established church, so you had to pay tithes to the established church, no matter what your religion was, or if you had no religion, you still had to pay your tithes to the Church of Ireland. And when he was church warden of Cregan, he refused to collect tithes of any tenant that wasn't of the Church of Ireland faith, which was a fairly moral judgment for him to be making at that time. So Ford's Cross and Ford's House is one that I would make lot of, in that he was a liberal landlord in an area that didn't have many of them.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. So look, I think we're maybe just gonna start to wrap up.
Right.
Being told. But yeah, I suppose I have one sort of request here, just to let people know that there's more sessions as part of this, that these programs. There's some excellent stuff coming from the Rural Health Partnership and Theresa and Margaret, and we're very, very lucky to have them. We're for all the fantastic work that they do. We think it's actually it's Patrick Linden is the bard and harpist who said they've come from the Sleeping, who visited Art McCooey in his home. So I suppose, is there just any maybe, because I realise that I've probably done an awful lot of talking here, but is there any sort of last few points that any of the folks or that are online want to make just before we sort of thank Una and start to finish up the evening?
Can I just ask if Una would mind explaining what is the Cairn Court and how old it is? The one that you mentioned at Anamar, please.
Anamar is 6,000 years of age. So there are most of the archaeology features of County Armagh are based within South Armagh. So in New Stone Age burial cairns, you have passage graves, dolmens, and court cairns. Now, the passage grave at the top of Slieve Gullion, they're all roughly about 6,000 years of age. The passage grave at the top of Slieve Gullion is exactly the same as Newgrange. In Newgrange, the rising sun of the winter solstice shines in and lights up the passage. At Slieve Gullion, at the top of the mountain, at the setting sun of the winter solstice, the light comes in and lights up the passage. Now, I mean, when you look at stuff that has been written or talked about Stone Age men, you know, obviously there were no Stone Age women, but anyway, the stuff gets written about Stone Age men, and you see a man with a loincloth and a club, and he's pulling somebody by the head, and he's beating them on top of the head with a club. And the inference to that is that these were people who had low intellect and not fit for anything. If you consider that 6,000 years ago, that somebody could build a structure on the top of Slieve Gullion, and that they were so in touch with the alignments of the sun and the turning of the earth, that they could build that on 3 days of the winter solstice, the light at the setting sun would light up that structure. Like, that's fairly remarkable stuff to comprehend. You know, now I think that these were probably master builders that moved around. I don't think there were, you know, I don't think it was maybe people in each area, because they're similar to other cairns that are across Europe. So I think this was something maybe that people moved around and did. But there's only the one passage grave in South Armagh. There's only the one dolmen, Ballykeel dolmen, just outside Mullaban, the townland of Ballykeel, and Ballyakyle, the narrow townland. If you look at the townland map of South Armagh, you'll know why that's called Ballykeel. It's a long, narrow strip of a townland. That's why the names are so important. So only one dolmen. But there are numerous court cairns. There were more court cairn built than any of the other structures. So you have Ballymcdermott over on the hip of the mountain. You have Clonchagora. You have Clonlum that was there. There are many court cairns that are marked on the old maps. There was one in Annaclochmullion marked on the old maps that are no longer there. But Anamar is exceptional because Anamar's structure is completely intact. So, I mean, I take people around on tours if people are interested in tours. And you have maybe somebody from America. American history, when they're talking about their history in America, they're celebrating something that's 200 years old. And they think that's old. Like when they stand at Anamar and they're standing somewhere that somebody stood almost 6,000 years ago and left their mark behind them. Built something and left it there, and that it's still there to go to. You know, this area is extremely lucky in what we have.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because I have to say that I've been in Cullyhanna all my life and I've never actually been there. So that's to my own shame. But yeah, maybe you don't appreciate properly what you have. There's one question here, Una, and I know I mentioned about getting the last few in, but this one's too interesting, I think, to leave. And it's somebody is asking about Tullyvallen and sorry, I just have it.
Johnny Baggs.
Yes, Johnny Baggs and the last hanging in Ireland, and a hanging tree in Tullyvallen.
Beggs's house, where Beggs's house is at the crossroads. That's where Johnson of the Fuse Barracks was. Is that the house you're talking about? Just when you
It
go up
seems to
from,
be, yeah.
when
Yeah,
you go up
seems-
from Tullyvallen houses that you're turning left, heading
Yeah.
for Blake. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Johnny Beggs's house was, I don't know if that's still Johnny Beggs' house.
Yeah.
But in the field, the road, Johnny Beggs's house is on the left-hand side, and the field across from it on the left-hand side, if you're going back up towards Dorsey, that's where Johnson of the Fuse Barracks was. The first barracks was at the top of Blackbank, up on 9 Mile Hill in the townland of Claddybeg. That's where Johnson's first barracks was. And the hope was that if the barracks was there, that a town would go up around the barracks, as it had done in many other places. And that didn't work. And that barracks was abandoned. And the next place that that was Johnson's father, the next place that the barracks was built was there at Beggs's, and that was Johnson's, and that controlled the road. That where Beggs's is part of the old road structure of the Ballymore Feta. So he controlled the movement, and he obviously was there, he said, to safeguard travellers from the Rapparees. So Johnson of the Fuse, my ancestor was Seamus Moore McMurphy from Kernally, and he was captured by Johnson of the Fuse and hanged in Armagh Jail in 1750. So he wasn't a good man in our house now.
You know.
Can I
But
can
I
I
mean,
come- can I come in and just
how are you, Brian? Dorsey, Roxborough house. Roxborough
That's
was
right.
where he lived. That was Johnson's house.
yeah, just when you're talking about Johnson, Roxburgh,
Who's Brian?
his house, but the Irish name which still survived was Cavan O'Hanlon.
Yes.
So I presume
Yeah.
that'll be on the stone. Cavan O'Hanlon.
Yeah, well, Cavan O'Hanlon, again, going back to the oral tradition, that's all my grand ever called it, was Dorsey Cavan O'Hanlon. Roxborough, he put on it because of Roxborough House, when he had built the house, and that's
Yeah.
because he had come from an area of Scotland
That's right.
that was Roxborough.
Roxburgh, that's right.
Yeah. Now, I don't know, I mean, I've talked to the Dorsey footballers and they're going to take on, but whether they're going to do sort of all the subdivisions or whether they're just going to do Dorsey, I don't know. That'll be up to them.
Well, I was growing up, I was told there was 12 townlands in Dorsey. 12
Yeah, well,
townlands.
there's certainly on the stuff that I've thrown up now, I'm throwing up 6. But you see, those subdivisions, Brian, you know, if we haven't got a record from the older people, then we've lost them.
There was an 8 in the Shara, Dorsey 8 in the Shara is one of the ones I remember.
And what do you know what particular area that was?
No, not really. When they used to have the priest Jews collections in the parish, they were always read out,
Yeah.
and each townland had his own collector,
Yeah.
and they were all read out, you know, on the townland's names and how much everybody gave
Yeah.
was read out at mass. So I mean, those townlands were very familiar to people up until our parents' time.
Yeah, and I mean they were familiar really until, but it's how quickly that information becomes lost. Like the introduction of the rural road naming in 1972, from 72 to now, I mean you've reared 3 generations who have really stopped using the townland name, and it's, you know, the thing about keeping something alive is the actual using of it. In some form. So that's why I think the townlands are such an important part of our history, that they really do need to be reclaimed.
Keep up the good work.
But
Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
lots of groups are doing it in different ways. I mean, the Slay each year would run a townland concert, which turns into a really strong competition, and people get very, very het up over who's winning this talent contest. But I mean, it keeps the names alive. when somebody's competing. There used to be tug of war in Townlands. Mickey was from Carrigan. They were known as the Carrigan Slashes. Any of the football clubs, when they were having sports day, there was always a Townland tug of war competition. I mean, for tournament matches for children done in Townlands. There's bits and pieces of ways that it can be kept alive, and if you're competing against each other, it gives you that wee bit of an edge.
Yeah, no, we were having the 125 years of the club. We had a sevens competition, and we did it in the Townlands. There was a few, if I remember correctly, there was a few imports and transfers that went on. But we get beat in the final. That's the way I'm so annoyed. But sorry, just Rose and Tom Moore, you your hand up if you. I'm not sure if you're wanting to come in there. This is your sort of virtual hand up, but I know sometimes maybe that can just get hit. Yeah, and there's a very good point just here being made on the chat, Una, that we all have a part to play, and including the Townland in your address.
Yeah.
I actually know I work for the Department of Agriculture. It's actually something you see in all the civil service departments now. There's obviously a policy taken in of putting Townlands into the official addresses to try and, I think somebody in the chat previously had mentioned it, put in the terms of reversing the destruction that had happened. So I suppose maybe just
One more.
sorry, I know we've nearly gone on we're nearly at the 2 hour mark. But
Maybe
Teresa,
Rose
is there?
Yeah.
Sorry, Teresa, were you looking to come in?
Yeah, I was just saying one more maybe question, Tom, Rose, maybe, or Tom, we just want maybe the last question. Would we just, if that's...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, if they're there. Yeah, no, fire away. I was.
They had a hand up for a wee while there, so.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was some.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, yes,
Rosie.
Brilliant. Yeah.
She's off
To
again.
the way back was
right.
Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, save me from Johnson, King of the Fuse.
That's right. That was part of the story that carried. I did a piece for Destination Uri before the turn of the year because it was the 300th anniversary of the birth of Seamus Moore. And those of us that are interested in the Murphy crowd weren't going to be alive for the 300th anniversary of his death. So we did it. We had intended to do a 3-day celebration, but COVID put an end to that. So we just did a record of it. But you know what was the interesting thing in it? When you start to bring stuff up, Seamus Moore was born in 1720, and Seamus Moore, because he was involved with the Jacobites, went to fight at the Battle of Culloden, made it home from Culloden, and then to be hanged in Armagh, which was fairly unfortunate. But Bonnie Prince Charlie was also born in 1720. And the man, one of the people who helped the escape with Flora MacDonald of Bonnie Prince Charlie, was one of the O'Neills from South Armagh, who was a general, went on to finish his life as a general in the Spanish Army, also born in 1720. You couldn't write it. The three men, the three parts of that story. It was the 300th anniversary of the three of them when we got the whole thing pulled together. So yeah, that carried on. That piece of the oral tradition of Johnson of the Fuse carried on.
No, look, thank you, Una. Yeah, look, I mean, I suppose just from the club's perspective, as we're maybe starting to finish up before 9, you know, one of the reasons that we'd asked Una to come along this evening, not that it was a fantastic and a brilliant and worthy thing to have done, worthy thing to have done no matter what. But what we're hoping to do is that it kicks off us looking at the Townlands. We're trying to do that in a couple of ways. Una had mentioned the stones, so we're hoping to erect stones to mark out the various Townlands in the Cullyhanna area, and we were delighted that you know, already there have been a few people had come through and volunteered to start to look after them. When we get that done, you know, hopefully when we get the restrictions released a little within the next in the next few weeks or so. So anybody that's in here this evening and will be interested, or knows somebody that would be interested in that, in getting involved with the Townland Stones, then we're very, very much welcome. Whether you've been involved with the club or not, this is this sort of stuff goes way beyond the GEA. We're just really a bit of a conduit for the excellent work that the likes of Unard is doing. And then I suppose the other thing that we're trying to do, as some of you might have seen, we have a St. Patrick's Operation Transformation Spot, we'll call it, which I suppose is all about getting out and exercising, and so trying to as much keep improve people at the moment difficult times, improve people's mental and physical health. So as part of that, we're going to do Townland, we're going to do walks, and so we have them sort of mapped out, some of them in my head, others I've managed to commit to paper so far. So we'll be starting on Saturday as part of the spots, and the first walk will actually, I think it's hitting 4 Townlands. So we Cullyhanna Little, Cullyhanna Big, Free Duff, and right, I've lost it. I think it's Tullyval. Anyway, we have different we've different sort of we've 7 different walks, and we'll be sort of marketing them, but promoting them as Townland walks, and marking out when you'll go into the different Townlands on each of the walks. So it's just a good way of sort of combining exercise and getting outdoors, with the Townlands. So that, I suppose, just before I hand over, maybe just for the just before we're finishing up, but I just want to say, just on behalf of the club and everybody that's been involved, I thank you, Una, because look, that's been absolutely brilliant. We're getting some great comments through here on the chat, Una, and your passion for the area and all of our areas, and the knowledge you have around Cullyhanna. It's just brilliant, and it's inspirational. It really is. It certainly made me want to get on and look at some of these things and learn a bit more about the area that I come from. And look to thank then also the Rural Health Partnership, and it's great that like yourselves in the GEA and the Rural Health Partnership and yourself, Una, can come together and try to do things for the community, because it's important, particularly in these times. We're all working together. Look, we had over 80 people at one stage on this call.
That's great.
So that was, compared to what you maybe would have had, look, it's the webinars definitely aren't perfect, as I was finding out desperately going in and out this evening, trying to work out and meeting or whatever, but they do make things really easy, which is great. So look, thanks a million, Una. And sorry, Teresa, do you just from the Rural Health Partnership, do you
the other thing is, Paddy, I mean, I've given you a broad outline of information, but I mean, there will be older people in your own area that have far more detailed information, because that's their area, than I would have. Do you know what I mean? So they're the people to hit into. They're the people who will give you the layer below what I've given you, because what I've given you is standard, detailed information on the Townlands and on the maps and that sort of stuff. But there'll be people then that have the oral history that's unique to that area. And if you can gather some of it as well, while all this other stuff's happening.
I suppose that's maybe our big challenge over the sort of next year or so, is to get the stuff that hasn't written down yet and take responsibility for writing it down. Yeah, some of those, I'm thinking of the like of Mary, her name's Mary McCardle, those older people, anyone that I mean, when my mother and grandfather used to start to talk, I don't know where Brian McCreesh is, whether he's gone, but when Mommy and Granda started to have a conversation about Dorsey, unless you were from Dorsey, you wouldn't know what they were talking about. It was like a foreign language, because everybody in Dorsey had a nickname.
You know, they were all Mackins or different, but they all had a nickname. And when the two of them started to have a conversation, nobody else could join in. Even stuff like that, you know, that where those families were, and they just, and because they talked a lot and they told stories a lot, the oral tradition is brilliant. It's unique. Sorry, Teresa.
No, it's all right, Una. No. I'm sure there's people who could want to listen all night, and you could talk forever. I'd say forever, the whole night, because you're very passionate about it. But just to say, Una, thank you very much on behalf of the Rural Health Partnership and, as Paddy said, on St. Patrick's GFC. And thanks to everybody for turning out tonight. And it's great to see so many people. As Paddy said, what about 80 people? Paddy, did you say it was on?
Yeah, it was 80 at one stage.
Yep, it's not fantastic, you know, and that is, we have to be grateful, I suppose, for Zoom, because I'm sure 88 people or 80 people wouldn't been out maybe tonight if it was in a hall. But I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for coming along. And anything you just want to, you know, ask or send an email, I've most people's emails that I've just copying and pasting there as you were sending them in. So I think I have everybody's emails, but anybody that wants anything or can't type in on the wee chat box, because, you know, Zoom's new to us all, we might just be fit to use it. Ring me or Una or Paddy or anybody, we'll get the presentation to you. So is that all right then? So thank you very much. And Una, just as last but not least, to say a big thank you very much. You were fantastic as always, and all the comments that's coming in here at the side says it all. So thank you very, very much.
That's great.
Will we?
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Hear the rattling of the stones, driving up the lane as I'm heading home. Pebbles sound just like the rain. Man, it's good to be back again. And although I may roam, venture far to the unknown, never be a place just quite like home. All these cities where I have flown, I will never call my own, 'cause I am my home gone. Youngest brother takes my hand, we wander through our father's land, walk on by the rustling leaves, swayed by the breeze among the newborn trees. And although I may roam, venture far to the unknown, never be a place just quite like home. All these cities where I have flown, I will never call my own, 'cause I am my home gone. Even if I sail the deepest oceans, even if I'm miles away from home, even if I travel the world for months or years, yeah, never forget where I come from. Never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget where I come from. Never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget where I come from. Never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget, never forget venture far to the unknown. There'll never be a place just quite like home. All these cities where I have flown, I will never call my own, 'cause I am my home. And although I may roam, venture far to the unknown, never be a place just quite like home. All these cities where I have flown,